webinar is Building Climate-Ready, Wildly Healthy Places in Texas, a Houston Perspective with Jaime González. He's the Community and Equitable Conservation Programs Director with the Nature Conservancy in Texas. My name is Alice Jansen, and I'm the Education Events Coordinator with the Texas Children in Nature Network, and we are very excited to have you all with us today. Yasmin Anderson is a nature-based program coordinator with the City of Austin's Cities Connecting Children to Nature program, and she's helping us with our tech today. So thank you for being here, Yasmin. There is automated closed captioning for this webinar. You can click the Show Caption CC button in the Zoom toolbar for live transcript options. We will be recording our session today, or we are recording it actually as we speak. And to save bandwidth, we ask everyone to turn their cameras off and mute themselves during the presentation. I will be monitoring the chat, so you can share your questions there, and I will share them with our presenter during the Q&A portion of the presentation. I will also be sharing the recording link of today's session in a follow-up email that'll go out next week. If you are uncomfortable with your name showing, you can change your name to anonymous and then private message Yasmin with your name for our attendance. Also, if your Zoom name doesn't match the name you registered with, please change your name or private message Yasmin with your name so she can record that. This part is very important, so please listen carefully. Only registrants that attend the live webinar are eligible to receive a certificate of completion. We do not automatically send all attendees a certificate. You must request the certificate after attending the live webinar. The email you received with the webinar Zoom link has the specific instructions for requesting the certificate. Attendance is taken during the live webinar, and we will check our attendance list to confirm your participation. We need the name you registered with to issue the certificate. All right, now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to do our land acknowledgement. The Texas Children in Nature Network is headquartered in Austin, and as such, I am on the ancestral and unceded land of the Tonkawa, Comanche, and Sana people. Our ongoing colonial presence on indigenous lands compels us to take action now to counteract the effects of colonization. The work we do through the Texas Children in Nature Network is one small step towards that effort. Here in a bit, I will put some information in the chat to learn more about land acknowledgements and these indigenous peoples groups. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here this afternoon. We have a very special webinar planned for you all today. And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker, Jaime González, to go ahead and start his presentation. Thanks, Jaime.
Okay, thank you for having me here today. I'm very excited to speak with you all. It's wonderful to see so many people from all over the state of Texas and to be a part of the Texas Children in Nature movement. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about my perspective. It's just one perspective in a whole ecosystem of perspectives right now about how we build healthier places in an age of a lot of disruption. And the way I thought about this talk was very much in line with kind of the evolution of the Texas Children in Nature movement. When there was a formalization of this process back in 2009 and 2010, when the first plan was delivered, the thinking, the considerations, the way we talk about the work, how we do or do not center equity and justice and other things was in a very different place in 2009 and 2010. Now, with more learning, we do better. And so I feel like the work that I'm going to be presenting today mirrors that evolution of thought within this movement, which is very exciting. I've seen the movement really do great things and very supportive and appreciative of the work that that the network does. So I just wanted to mention that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and I'm going to talk to you about some things that are happening in Houston, which I think are emblematic of things that can happen across the state and are happening across the state. This is not a one-size-fits-all. The ecologies, the culture, the people, so many things are different in different places in Texas. We certainly appreciate that. Yet there are some commonalities in places like Dallas and Houston and San Antonio and Austin and other places in between. So some of these solutions are very transferable. Some would need to be kind of, transformed for your own particular context. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a framing, talk about where we are in terms of understanding these things and kind of the frame shift that we're trying to get. Then we're going to go on and we're going to take a look at two case studies, as it were. We're going to look at a schoolyard project that we're working on in Alief ISD, which is Southwest Houston. And then we're going to look at the neighborhood level. And we're going to talk about what it means to co-design better places, healthier places, more climate resilient places, and one that's inclusive of all the residents, not just the people, but the non-human community there as well. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start by recognizing that many folks are coming into this meeting, coming in from another meeting, and are probably jangled a little bit. This is the midday. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for a second. And I'm just going to have you listen for just a few seconds to kind of recenter. We'll all recenter together. As you listen to this, I just want you to take in a few long breaths. Okay. I wish I could play that the entire time. I'm hoping you feel a little bit de-stressed. This is going to come into this talk, as is where this recording was made. It was made on a very ancient old growth prairie just south of Houston in Brazoria County called the Nash Prairie. Nash Prairie is going to figure into the story that I'm telling you about, how we think about things, but also in the practice of building healthier places. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and start. If there are any questions along the way, you can feel free to put them in the chat. At the end of this, we're also going to have a Mentimeter that we'll throw up so that you can put your observations, your reflections, your confusions, whatever that might be. I am not into what I call intentional self-delusion, so I don't pretend to know everything, and I don't pretend to have all the answers. I'll try to get them as best as I can, and if I don't know something, that's not going to be unusual, but we'll just try to give you state of play. All right, so let's talk about where we are in Houston. So Houston is a really super complicated place, probably like the places that you live. And what I will say about Houston is I often call it Houston, because for every superlative that Houston has, and it has many superlatives. So it is the energy capital of the world, for good or bad. It is the most diverse major metro area for human diversity in the United States. A lot of people don't know that. It has the fantastic restaurant scene, NASA, all the sports you could ever want, a great zoo, the biggest medical center in the world, and on and on and on. It has all of those things. And yet it's got a series of challenges that mirror the country's challenges. It has persistent air and water quality issues. One of the things we're going to talk about is air quality today and how we manage landscapes and what that means for air quality. So this is a region that's never been in attainment for ozone, which damages human health, but it's also got chronic particulate matter, nitrous oxide, and other chemicals that pollute the air and damage young lungs and cause other health conditions. It's got chronic water issues, dioxins, depending on where you are, chromium. It's also got soil contamination issues. So one of the things that's happening right now is in the 5th Ward, which is a predominantly African-American community, there is a serious problem with creosote from a former production facility right there at a Union Pacific site, which has caused a cancer cluster, right? Added to these kind of persistent chronic issues that we have seen for human health, we have an accelerating climate crisis, and Houston is the most climate damaged city in the US. I was able to witness this firsthand during Hurricane Harvey. So Hurricane Harvey, as many of you know, was a storm of record. It caused, it flooded over 120,000 structures in my city. I saw people being picked up by helicopter in my neighborhood. I had to evacuate my own home during Hurricane Harvey. And this is the thing that really snapped people's attention to the climate crisis here and the need to build a different city And so it's also the reason I have this job. For 5 years, I was actually the Houston Healthy Cities Director, the founding director of that program. And my whole job is, how do I work with planning and policy and funding and communications to build a greener, more resilient, more healthy city, working with a lot of partners, municipal partners, community partners, nonprofit partners. Every single project that I have is a partner project. And as bad as flooding is, I will say that heat is going to be the thing that eats the city if we don't get it under control in terms of adapting to heat. We can't control everything happening with the climate. One thing we'll talk about today is the heat mapping that we did along with Harris County Public Health and with City of Houston and a group called HARC. Back in 2020, we did the largest major community science heat mapping project in US history. We're about to break that record again this year. And what we found out about heat and where it's building up plays a big role in this conversation today. So urban heat island mitigation is part of this real story. So that's what's happening with the humans. The humans have a great city, lots of amenities, a lot of things to do. I love the pace and the energy and the diversity, but there's some serious climatic and environmental challenges. On the other hand, what we have is we have a city that is exceptional for biodiversity. So one of the things that I had a chance to do a while back is to present, it was called the Hotspot Cities Conference at the University of Pennsylvania. At that time, the university had identified 33 international cities that were called hotspot biodiversity cities. What that means is those places had exceptional biodiversity that were under great threat because of development. And there were exactly 2 in the US. The first was Los Angeles, and the second was Houston. So what you have is you have this growing metropolis, as we're seeing across the state, that is eating up more and more and more habitat. And that habitat is being replaced by a lot of concrete, right? And so what you have is you have the need to protect habitat and the need to make healthier places for people. But we have an issue here, and that is our landscape choices. Like many of the places you live, we have been enculturated into a practice, a way of being, a way of talking about landscapes that is really predicated on a couple of things that really no longer work for the century that we're in. One is this concept that everything needs to be basically situated on one value, and that's aesthetics. So it has to look a certain way and function a certain way because that is the standard by which it works. And unfortunately, the aesthetics are very, very controlled, oftentimes using species that do not perpetuate or support biodiversity, often using species that don't really tell us much about where we live. Placemaking is low. And lastly, many of these landscapes are incredibly resource intensive and polluting at the same time. So if you look across Harris County, we have miles and miles of lawn. Now, not all lawns are bad. I have a lawn in my front yard. Actually, this is my front yard behind me. During the spring, it's a little mini prairie, but for the rest of the year, it's a lawn. So lawns have a form and a function and a place for recreation, for get-togethers, for soccer, football, these things. But we also have literally tens of thousands of acres in Houston, which are mowed on public properties for no other reason except for the fact that that's just the way we've always done it. And we are making reference to English lawns. So these are status symbols, right? And they're kind of a way of saying, this is who I am. I have this fancy lawn. But the cost of that is extreme, in my opinion. We'll talk about some statistics, not only financially, but from a health perspective, in a biodiversity perspective, in a placemaking perspective, it comes at a very heavy cost. And so one of the key questions is, how do we rebuild habitat in our spaces, in new spaces that are healthier, more biodiverse, and better at situating our Texan identity and where we are in the world. So that's the key concept. Now, real quickly, I'm just going to tell you about how I'm approaching this work and a little bit about Nature Conservancy here in Texas. So first of all, Nature Conservancy just passed a major milestone. If you don't know who the Nature Conservancy is, we're a global environmental or a conservation program. We have saved in Texas, we just passed a really important milestone, which is 1 million acres conserved. So about every 54 acres of 100 acres that have been conserved in Texas, we've had a hand in. Incredible milestone, very hard to do. It's been taking us since the 1960s when we purchased our first property. But you can see on this graphic, all the places that are now public spaces, many of which have access, that we've helped to conserve. It's a big goal. But how do we get more people access to nature? We have limited access to our preserves. There's limited access to other places. So a lot of this talk is not only how do we remanage places, but also how do we attend to nature inequity? Well, here's one of the key pieces. I'm going to tell you about the key piece here biologically, and then we're going to talk about philosophy real quick. This is the Nash Prairie Preserve. So when you were hearing that recording earlier, this is what you were hearing in spring. This is that ancient old growth prairie, and I'm a prairie ecologist, so I'm very attuned to this kind of landscape. But these landscapes are two things. One, they're blueprints for how we do modified revegetation in cities and suburbs and other places, and schoolyards and neighborhoods. So they kind of tell us, like, how do you kind of put these things together functionally and what it could support? But another key part of this is this. This is the seed source, particularly in a time of climate change and great variability in terms of droughts and freezes and floods. These plants are built to survive fire and grazers and droughts and floods and all these things that we can throw at it. So one of the things we have to do is we have to think about where our seed sources, where are the sources of acorns and tree seeds that are highly resilient, that have gone through all of these cycles over eons. Where are the wetlands that we will collect seeds to grow out more wetland plants? Because at the end of the day, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to transform some of those highly costly, non-functional, beyond just a lawn, spaces into something that approximates, not going to be the same thing, that approximates some of the functionality, the look, the feel, and the cultural context of our native landscape. So this is one of my favorite places in the world. And if you look at the Nature Conservancy's work here in the greater Houston area, what you'll see are all these numbers. Numbers 6, 7, 8, and 9 are some of my principal projects. But needless to say, from that previous slide, those preserves at 1, 3, 2, and 10 are some of the seed sources we're using for some of the revegetation, rewilding work that we're doing in the city. So it's important to recognize that the wild preserves are not disconnected from the city. We're all on a coastal plain. It's all connected ecologically, culturally, through practice. And so it's not just me doing this work, it's my colleagues at the Nature Conservancy, and it's our partners. All right, let's talk about philosophy real quick before we dive in. So one of the things that I do is I work a lot with the city and the county in terms of climate planning, in terms of children nature planning, resiliency, and equity. But when you do planning, you oftentimes only look at this. You either do it from a biological, ecological standpoint, what's really going to help the biodiversity, all the different non-human beings in that place, or you do work on behalf of human stakeholders, community members, decision makers. So this is a place at the very headwaters of action that complicates things in a highly dynamic world. So one of the things we want to do is we actually want to plan actions, form policies, do funding, all of these things, political levers at this intersectionality. This is actually a community. This is the living community of a place. And that sounds easy to do, but in practice, it's very hard because this is not de rigueur. This is not the way things are typically planned. So I'm going to tell you about a planning process that we're doing, but I just want to show you that the framework through which I'm working is something called One Health. It's not a conservation framework. Conservation is an important piece of this, but One Health really started off with zoonotic diseases, which means how can nature hurt people, right, with things like COVID-19. And so we have to take into account all the different environmental risks that are taken into account. But as this model has evolved, and as we're using this expanded model for planning and practice and funding and all this, what we're finding is that there are so many, as you know, so many benefits to nature that we want to lift that up. So we're doing a lot of work with Harris County Public Health, a group called HeartCare, to figure out what does One Health in the real world look like? How do we socialize this construct? Because this is a place where conservation, the environmental justice movement, climate resiliency, indigenous leaders, public health leaders, park space advocates, and other people can come as themselves and their identities and work towards nature positive, people positive change. So I'm not saying that the conservation movement is not necessary. It's more necessary than ever. But working in this different frame, I believe, is going to make all of our efforts more inclusive and make it even better. I will just shout out to Carolyn White, who's a very close collaborator with Harris County Public Health. She is right now working, and final review is underway. I just got my final review version of the first One Health built environmental toolkit that we know of in Texas. So this is loaded with ways in which you can better embed nature for a variety of mental, physical, and other benefits for human beings while uplifting biodiversity and improving air, water, soil, and climate resilience. All right. We are also doing one other thing. This is TBD, but it's going to be put out very soon. I will share it with all of you. We're doing what we think is the first One Health index in the country. And what that means is that we're taking all of these data layers and we're crunching them with a group called Asakura Robinson. And we are going to be able to take a look at specific neighborhoods and see what their One Health score is. So what is the health of the people, the environment, and the biodiversity in that one place? That will probably help us identify communities to engage around nature and nature-based solutions in a more kind of holistic way, right? So what the heck does all this mean in actual practice? I'm going to show you a couple things, a couple of projects that are emblematic of this thinking and this practice. But before I do that, I'm going to show you this. I know that Laura Cuellar is on this call. Shout out to her. So one of the things that is very important is that the City of Houston, working with Sarah and Texas Children Nature Network and many other actors, came up with this Children's Bill of Rights last year. I believe very strongly in this. I like the way that it came out. And it features both kind of two things. Nature as enrichment, how does it enrich our lives? But also nature as protection. How does it protect us from all the challenges that we have? And I think that's really important. And that's the way that I talk about it. It's both enrichment and protection. All right, let's get to some practice. All right, here we go. So the first thing I'm going to show you is something called the Jefferson Early Learning Center. Many of you work with schools. Many of you work alongside these communities, doing projects at different scales. This is a One Health project. From the beginning, I've thought about it that way. And it's got multiple functions in multiple dimensions, and we are finalizing a series of reports, one of which is a cost-benefit analysis for doing schoolyards this way. So here's the big idea, so I don't bury the lead. The idea is to take a school campus from its design implementation stage to maximize the amount of habitat on that school campus for biodiversity, for climate readiness, and for interactions with nature particularly in neighborhoods that are park deserts or are places where kids aren't likely to have nature in and around their homes. So one of the things that I'll mention about this school, this wonderful school, I was just there this week, is that it serves 4-year-olds, about 500 every year, and it's just a 1-grade place. So there's going to be a lot of kids coming through the years. About 50% of these kids do not have access right next to their house with anything approaching a park. So without 10 minutes to a park, but also a lot of those kids live in apartments. So they don't even have oftentimes very nature-rich places, even in the apartments that they live. So there's a nature deficit that many of these kids, very diverse campus, beautiful kids, they don't have a lot of nature. This school campus was intentionally designed by Alief ISD and the largest school architecture firm in Texas called PBK in a brilliant way. It designs nature from the inside out. I don't have time to show you all the nature that's inside. It's a massive amount of nature imagery, and the whole campus is built, if you can take a look right here, in kind of that dynamic organic wheel, right? So unlike a usual campus, PBK brought us in early, and Alief ISD wanted to champion this idea of a nature-based campus. And so what we typically do is we typically build a campus such that we shuttle most of the water into a giant reservoir that's chained off and not accessible to children. And when we do that, it's oftentimes everything else is lawn, which requires a tremendous amount of mowing. We'll talk about that. What we did instead is we restored about 2.5 acres of prairie using seeds from Nash Prairie and other sites. And then we have interlaced with that about 2 acres of wetland area. So what we have is about 4.5 acres of a native ecology, and added to that, we planted about 180 trees. To be truthful, some of those trees died during the drought. We replaced them with some others, but it's still nip and tuck. We've just had the 2 hottest, driest summers in Houston history, so that really impacted. But the idea was, how can we maximize this infrastructure from a One Health perspective, such that the whole campus is being used? Now, I've worked on over 40 campuses here in the Houston-Galveston area, typically making small habitat gardens or pollinator gardens. This design, for me, was important for a number of reasons. One is we were able to design for both the people and the wildlife. So we had the wildlife very much in mind when we were selecting both the seed sources and the species. We made a prediction as to which species we'd see based on the plant palette. The second thing that's very important, I think this is super important, to attend to equity. I am not dismissing working on school campuses on smaller gardens. Tremendous impact. I've been there, I've done it a lot. But it oftentimes puts an inequitable burden on teachers to fundraise, maintain, and do everything else. And then when a teacher turns over, and you've probably lived this misery yourself, some of you, that whole thing falls apart. And then it falls apart in such a way that the remaining administrators don't want to redo it because it's left in such a dilapidated, so it kind of poisons the well after. That doesn't always happen, but it happens in enough cases that I thought, what if we flip the paradigm such that the teachers did not have to maintain this unless they were doing service projects or learning with their students? Instead, what if the operations and maintenance department actually maintained these wild settings so that teachers could do what they were paid to do, which is to focus on learning and teaching? That's what's happening here. We have all of this maintained by a trained staff of operations and maintenance crew, and they come in here and they do the maintenance. So it really relieves the teachers from doing this work. And so there's an equity thing there. The second thing about that maintenance plan is that oftentimes the people in charge of maintenance departments are much longer tenured than your average teacher. They're going to be around for 25, 30 years. So if they get it and they can do it on other campuses, it makes a little bit more sense. This is what it looked like last spring. So really beautiful. These seeds, we purchased some of these seeds interdigitated with like native seeds that we harvested. And what we've seen is two things, right? We've seen, obviously, the kids love this. The teachers love this. When they do school drills, it's hard to get the kids back inside because there's so many birds and butterflies and all that are attracted. From a biologicals perspective, when I was there this week, they were falcons hunting this. There were migratory sparrows using this habitat. There's big wildlife. There's herons and egrets and things like that. So nature kind of at a macro scale instead of just a smaller habitat scale. But also with learning, it's an important component. So what we did is we created and Sharon Young did this, and she's just an amazing early childhood educator. She worked with A-Leaf and us to create a whole campus curricula around how to teach about nature, but not in a kind of disconnected way, in a culturally competent way, but also age appropriate and geographically appropriate. So we put a kind of a neighborhood history, neighborhood ecology, how we did the restoration to give people a context for why it was happening and how we did it. So when you take a look at this campus, one of the things I want to point out is this. One is it does absolutely attend to cultural identity. So we're about to have the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, the biggest in Texas. This is actually a picture of African-American cowboys on a saltgrass prairie south of Houston in the 1870s. So we don't typically market ourselves as this giant cowboy place like Fort Worth, but we've had cowboys here since the 18 teens, and prairies are that landscape where they were built. So reconnecting the social event, the rodeo, with the actual landscape is important. Here's a health perspective. So last October, Environment Texas worked with several groups to come up with a report on the cost of lawn maintenance in Harris County. What they found was Harris County was #1 in the US for air pollution emissions regarding lawn care. That accounted for an emissions, think about this, a pollution, it's like the equivalent of having 3.8 million cars on the road. And each year we produce about 358 tons of particulate matter because of lawn care. Well, particulate matter is really horrible for asthma, which causes more children to lose school time than anything else. It's really bad for heart disease. Some sources say that it could be a causative effect of diabetes and many other health ailments. At the same time, when you mow that much, that is a climate damaging landscape. You are emitting a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide into the air, which is causing climate to get worse, right? So you're also, lastly, as you mow grasses down and you have these landscapes of turf, you're making them much hotter and less absorptive to water. So what we're doing is we're creating these landscapes that are not as spongy, dirty in terms of air quality. As far as the biodiversity concerned, junkyards are 4 times more biodiverse than lawns. And we're paying a lot of money to do this intentionally, right? We're paying a lot of money to do this. So the areas that are lawn get mowed about 26 times a year. The areas that are prairie get mowed 1 to 2 times a year. Big difference. So think about the air emissions reduction, the carbon emissions reduction, the added water that can be absorbed. And you also think about the heat. And one of the things that people don't know about these schoolyards is that they can get very hot. This is a prairie that I worked in the Texas Medical Center. It's kind of famous now. It's called the MD Anderson Prairie. And I do a lot of thermal imagery. And what you can see here is that the more purple, the cooler. The more white and yellow, the hotter. And you can actually see the color gradient between the inside of that prairie, which is like having a bunch of air conditioners through transpiration, versus some parts of that lawn, which are verging into the yellow. On a day when I was out there, I measured temperatures in the middle of that prairie, about 87 degrees. The lawn on that day was 98 degrees and that road was about 138 degrees. Should have a massive temperature swing. So as we think about cooling Texas cities, what I would say is this: trees are absolutely essential. We're doing work in urban forestry, but anytime we can put in a native grassland or native wetland in any context, it's going to help to cool the city. So let's not forget about all that stuff. So I'm going to just show you this quick aerial drone footage that we just shot last year to show you the scale of this project, which is unlike any project I've ever worked on a school campus. So you can see the scale of this thing is pretty huge, and you're not even seeing the other side of this restoration. So like I said, this is big ecology for a campus. And the great thing is, you know, this is all scalable. So if you have a smaller campus, this is a pretty big campus. If you have a smaller campus, you can scale it to whatever you need to do. So for me, having the forest component, the grassland component, the wetland component, you start to get that nexus of biological resilience and diversity, and kids get to see and interact with the maximum amount of really cool stuff. All right. So because I want to move on to the next thing, I'm going to move on to the next thing. But I'll mention this. This campus has won a lot of awards already. It just won a huge award for design from the Texas Association of Architecture. It also was the very first school that I can think of that won an award through the Houston-Galveston Area Council's Parks and Natural Areas. This is typically reserved for parks, green spaces, and other places, but this is a mini national park. And as such, it was nominated and it won. All right. Let me get to this real quick. And Sarah, I know we don't have too much time. If you can remind me how much time we want to reserve for questions, that would be great.
We have a few questions in the chat already, so maybe like 2:45, switch into Q&A.
Yeah, and I'll leave this board up when we do that. I'm going to be kind of quick here. If we look at the neighborhood level, the big story here with Greener Gulfton, I can share this, the report and things with you all, is schools are great because they're equitably distributed pieces of public infrastructure that we can optimize. But that's not enough, right? And parks aren't enough. How do you take nature and distribute it across a neighborhood? One thing that we did, and I can share this with you, is last summer we worked on a project with Rice University students who were looking at biodiversity equity. If you've never heard of biodiversity equity, it's probably because I think we kind of made it up. It's basically this: if you have parks, it oftentimes seems like you should have lots of biodiversity, but we all know that schools show up as green on maps. Many parks show up as green on maps, but there's nothing there to see because it's just a lawn and some stick trees. So we're not just interested in putting green spaces in, but reinfusing this neighborhood with nature. And I'm not going to have time to show you all of this, but I am going to share the Prezi link with you all, and you can kind of tool around on it on your own. But here was the major thing. We did a project called Greener Gulfton. It's an 11-month planning process with everybody under the sun for Houston's densest and most diverse neighborhood. It's an immigrant community. Over 80 languages are spoken here. It's also the most concreted neighborhood in the city, and it was the hottest. So when we measured heat in this neighborhood, it was 17 degrees hotter than the coolest neighborhood on that August day in 2020 when we measured. That's not uncomfortable, just uncomfortable. It can be deadly. People sometimes have heat stroke waiting for the bus. That's not okay. This neighborhood is rapidly heating up even more. So it's not uncommon for me to measure temperatures of 135 degrees on this pavement. But it does something else. When you have landscapes like this is at the corner of Gulfton and Rampart. One thing that I always tell people is, this is not a neutral landscape. This is a damaging landscape to human health. Why? Concreted areas increase stress levels, blood pressure levels, but they also damage your sense of self-worth, self-efficacy. And for kids that are trying to go to school and achieve, or parents who are really struggling with finances, this is just one added burden that they have to carry, seeing these concreted spaces. So what do you do with something like this? Well, what would you do is you get to work, you do a lot of science. And if you go to Nature Score and look up this neighborhood, you'll notice that out of 100, this neighborhood gets a 27.3. It is what is termed a nature-deprived neighborhood, and it comes with all the consequences of that. Now, I'm very familiar with this neighborhood because it is a source of affordable housing, and it's the only thing that let me finish college, because I lived here for 2 years when I was finishing up at U of H. It's the only place I could find affordable housing. So we worked with neighborhood champions. These ladies are just a tremendous trio. On the left is Sandra Rodriguez, the president of the Golden Super Neighborhood Council. Right next to her is Maria Hernandez, who is just this bright beacon who leads a group called Madres del Parque. And then behind Sandra is Ann Whitlock. Just saw them today. And it was with their leadership and working with a lot of people that we were able to come up with a regreening plan for this neighborhood. But here's something that's important from a One Health perspective. We held a metaphorical seat open for wildlife at every single meeting. Now, that could have gone over very badly because some people would be like, well, why did they get included? Well, one of the beautiful things about this community is that they welcomed that. They wanted to see more wildlife. They wanted wildlife to have a voice. And they also wanted to remember Indigenous history and to remember their Indigenous ancestors. So as you tool around this, after this talk, you'll see some of the visions and the other things. But this was a way for us to make the Houston Climate Action Plan, which we worked on a lot with the city, and the resilience plan real in the world, make it tangible. And what I'm happy to report is that we found that there were 7 major things that could happen here. And that those 7 things were high priorities. About 4 of those are actually moving forward. Let me just tell you about a couple things. But let me also just mention this about crime. From a One Health perspective, there are many things we know and don't know, but we do know some things that are kind of different. One of which is that the hotter the temperature in a neighborhood in summer, the higher the violent crime rate is likely to climb. So if you have fewer trees, you're likely to have more homicides. This has been true in community after community, also in concreted places like this and North Philadelphia, where I was born. You have higher crime rates, partially due to the lack of nature, literally. So if your nature is not up to par, you are going to start to see these impacts, which you would never see the connection to. Let me just tell you a couple of cool things that are happening. One is I literally just left this meeting before I spoke to you guys. This community has 1 park for 60,000 people, and the park was not in great shape. So Harris County took it back from the city, and they're working on redesigning the park with a naturalistic bent. So they're taking what is a deficit and they're changing this into an ecological gem, which is exactly what people said that they wanted to see. That's great. But we've also designed some interventions that the county is working with right now. And that is some shading structures, the implementation of a brand new design in the metro system for a green roofed bus stop. These are going to be called rest stops, and other things like tree planting. So we went out with Texas A&M Forest Service, and we literally, here's what that shading structure will look like. We literally mapped everywhere a tree could go. And then with a bunch of ecologists, we designed a climate-ready palette that was also supportive of biodiversity and aesthetics. So coming full circle, what we have found is that in this neighborhood, people absolutely love nature. The absence of nature is not the proof of not caring about nature. Usually those are not connected at all. And what you see here are people, we worked on this, this article with the Chronicle. There's a huge patio culture here. People love nature. They just can't afford it. So fortunately, the philanthropic community, the governmental communities are rallying around this notion of a greener Gulfton. And we're trying to talk about this as a model for other climate vulnerable neighborhoods, whether it's flooding, whether it's heat, or other things. And in the process, I think what we're going to do is we're going to make some of these climate resiliency and One Health directives real. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop. I'm going to leave this up in case you have questions.
Awesome, Jaime. Thank you so much for that. I love this presentation platform. Very interactive.
And I'm going to put a Mentimeter link in here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stick this in here in case anybody wants to leave any messages. Just go to menti.com and then use 34635896114.
Awesome. Well, I am going to start sharing the questions that we received during the presentation.
Great.
The first question is, would love to hear, or this is a comment, would love to hear about how you convinced the district and A-Leaf ISD to take on maintenance.
Yeah, so I think that the leading answer to that is they want to, like many school districts, want to reduce the maintenance costs. Like, how do we? They have a very set number of people that do maintenance, and yet they have more and more schools to deal with. And as the population of Texas, which is now 30 million, it's going to go up to 50 million. As we continue to eat up land, we're going to have all of these new schools, and they're growing in such a way in these rapidly developing places that the maintenance crews do not keep up with the number of campuses, right? So in this case, it would take, if the whole thing were lawn, it would take a crew of 5 men or women, depending on the crew, 8 hours to mow the whole thing. So they're spending one day on one campus mowing this whole thing. Instead, they are taking about 4 hours to maintain everything. So you basically literally cut their stuff in half, the cost, the time, so they can be somewhere else. So one of the main aspects was, can we just reduce maintenance on this project, and how can we do that in other campuses? So we're having some discussions with them about the Texas A&M Forest Service's initiative to reforest school campuses up to 40% canopy cover. That's also a way of taking lawn out of rotation for maintenance. So in a super hot neighborhood like A-Leaf, that's extra special important, but I think that they really bought into the notion of, 1, all kids deserve nature, and 2, can we reduce maintenance loads?
Great, thank you. I'm going to do a follow-on that is in association with that. Do you have a one-pager we can share with HOAs regarding kind of the lawn issues? You were talking about that when you were talking about the prairie there.
Yeah. As far as lawn issues are concerned, there's some good resources, and I'll send them as a follow-up email from the Native Plant Society of Texas, the different chapters in the main group itself. One thing to know that a lot of people don't know is that when Governor Perry was a governor many eons ago, he signed a bill that gives people limited protection from HOAs if people are planting xeriscaped plants. So if there are plants that are conserving water in Texas, because we have water scarcity issues already, you have partial protection from HOAs. So a lot of people don't know that, and they just kind of get cited, or they get the note and they don't know that they have that recourse. Native Plant Society of Texas Houston chapter has some really great resources, because one of our greatest champions for naturescaping is someone named Lauren Jansen Simpson, who is a professor who works at the law school here at the University of Houston. She's put together some briefing documents on that and other protections. So what I would say is, doing things like this means knowing what you can and cannot do vis-a-vis that law or that bill. And also, what I would say is there's a lot of intentionality that goes into it if you make it look intentional. And lastly, if you interpret it and encourage your neighbors to help you with it, you get several layers of protection, right? So that doesn't work with every place, but it's a start to build some protection.
Thank you. There was a little question and discussion about snakes. Somebody shared that they get a lot of questions about snakes, and then someone shared some, reassuring information that they're part of the ecosystem. Most of them aren't venomous, that sort of thing. And I guess to kind of connect it to what you're talking about, are snake concerns an issue at the schools that you're working with or in these neighborhoods? Like, what's the kind of
Always
lived
be
experience?
prepared. What I tell people is always get ahead of the story curve. Don't fall behind, because then it's going to be really tough. And sometimes those projects get ripped out. So I always tell people what is coming, what it's going to be like. And sometimes you can even be kind of cheeky. Like one time I designed a sign. We didn't actually put it out, but I will at some point in my career. It said new homes coming soon. It wasn't people homes, but I think that one thing to recognize is two things. One is I've never actually seen a snake on a restoration project that I've done in a city, and I've done over 40. Never. One thing that I've done before to allay fears with that MD Anderson project, which is in the biggest medical center in the world, was that I actually had a group of researchers from University of Houston downtown come and do rodent trapping and look for snakes. They didn't find anything, right? And part of it is, unless they're wearing a parachute, it is very hard to get into these things because it's surrounded by roads, right? Many of these projects have roads all the way around, and there's not good habitat in between. So snakes don't like to be in open country to get picked off by snakes or by hawks and other things, but also they have to survive the gauntlet of the streets. So one thing that I do let people know about is, like, look at what they would have to do to get here. It's not likely that they're going to get here. And then one thing that we've done here and we've done in other sites is establish an iNaturalist project so that people can report the biodiversity they're seeing, but also we can kind of keep track of what's coming in. But yes, snakes are something you should absolutely talk to people about when you do urban grasslands. Be upfront about it, because they will ask.
Awesome. Great response. All right, next question. Where do you find a climate-ready palette for trees and plants? We could use some help with the Montrose Boulevard redo.
Oh, Montrose Boulevard redo. Email me. I
From
can get
Russ
you
Kane.
resources. So a couple things. One is you can tap into, here in Houston at least, there's a couple of things. One thing that I worked on when I was at what was called then the Katy Prairie Conservancy, now called the Coastal Prairie Conservancy. They do really, really great work. This is a great land trust, is the 9 Natives program. So what we did at that point is we created these sun and shade friendly collections of plants that work together very well, have a collective long bloom cycle, structurally work well together, feed a lot of different things together, and can be grown either separately or in combinations. And there's even some design plans in here that an architect named Beth Clark, who's amazing, put together. And then there's some native plant resources here. So if you are in the Houston area, this works really well. I know that the Fort Worth chapter of the Native Prairies Association of Texas was working on one for the kind of the Fort Worth and Dallas area of 9 Natives. We did this program because we knew that people are very smart. They're just time limited, and they could use some help as a starter kit, right? Now, in terms of trees, oh boy, is this something that I think about a lot right now. We're hoping to do some AI research on what trees are going to be best to grow here for the next 30 years. We lost 1 billion southern magnolias this summer during the drought. There are historic species that just are not going to make it here. So the ecologists that I'm working with, if you don't know what to do right now, we also are trying to figure this out. It's going so fast. Now, if you are in Houston, and you might want to, look at this guide as well. This is a really good guide that was put out, but it was put out a long time ago in 2017. And it's a really good resource. My friend Doris Hurd put this together. And I'm going to put that Texas tough trees. These are super resilient tree species. Many of these actually did really well during the drought. So I think it's still very applicable, but we're kind of doing some longer range forecasts. That makes sense?
Yes. Thank you for pointing him in the right direction with that. I'm just going to go up to see what other questions. Someone was asking about Dallas and someone responded with Southwestern Medical District
Oh
Urban
boy.
Escape and Park Project, which is awesome. Are you involved with any work in the Dallas area? Similar
So
work?
I actually did present there last year on One Health at a medical conference. And I know that there's this Texas Trees Foundation is working on this big kind of reforestation program. It's one of the hottest places in the city. I'm not doing work there, but my colleague, Dr. Kathy Jack, has done work principally around green stormwater infrastructure in Dallas and the Trinity River. And so she's really doing with her colleague, Justin Kozak, a lot of modeling for how do we save things upstream, and then where could you create green stormwater to protect from flooding?
Great. So lots of great work happening everywhere, including Dallas. Here's a question from Susan. Wow, so much incredible information. Have you worked with any suburbs to use green practices instead of just using St. Augustine covering their green spaces?
Yeah, back in the
They
day, when I was
fertilize.
at the Katy Prairie Conservancy, there were a couple of large developments. One was called Cross Creek Ranch, and the other was, it was a different ranch. You know, we typically like name subdivisions of, you know, after things that we destroy. So there were actually ranches there. And we actually did work with landscape architects to figure out what a proper plant palette and maintenance is. If I had more time and more bandwidth, that is a huge opportunity as the whole state continues to develop. There's a niche for a conservation or environmental group to help people figure that out. I'm not seeing that really happen much. So it's a crying out need.
Thank you. This is kind of along the same lines. Do you know how upfront installation costs compare for sod versus native ground cover and plantings and mulch? You know, kind of giving that the argument for using natives and.
Right. So this triple bottom line analysis I'm reviewing, I just got it today. And we're going to provide that with you. I will say for the entire ecological restoration of those 4.5 acres and all the trees, and we redid a lot of things because we hit 2 of the worst droughts in history in the summer and they killed a lot of stuff. We still only spent maybe $70,000 on that. That project cost like $35 million. So that's a rounding error, right? So in order to do it the better way, especially if there's a community of practice that gets good at this, it is going to be marginal, the extra upfront costs, but the maintenance cost is going to go down. So what we're looking at is what is the cycle over 10 years of the difference. So we have 3 case studies that we're looking at. Build a vanilla campus that is not super healthy, build the campus as we built it, and then build the campus as we built it and make it publicly accessible as park space. So what are the numbers, ecological, environmental, health, and financial for each of those 3 cases? So we think that this report will be out probably early March, if not late February, and we'll be happy to share it.
Wonderful. Well, that looks like all of our big questions from the chat. So I just want to, and we're almost at 3 o'clock. So I just want to thank you again, Jaime, for presenting on this very important topic. I did go ahead and put some information in the chat about our next webinar. It's coming up on March 6th. More green time, less screen time with Sarah Nielsen with SG Wellness. So the link to register for that webinar is in the chat. And then I have also included our evaluation for today's webinar. So take some time and fill that out. I also can't leave without letting you all know that we're able to provide these webinars free of charge. But we always love donations, and these donations go right back into the work that we do here at the Texas Children in Nature Network. We help pay for webinars and other resources for our partner network. So thank you all very much. We appreciate you all taking time out of your afternoon to learn from Jaime about what's happening in Houston. And there's lots of kudos coming up on the chat, so be sure to check that out, Jaime. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Everyone have a great afternoon, and I will be following up next week with the resources that Jaime has offered to share, and also the recording of this webinar. So thank you.
I can't thank you enough for hosting me. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you all, no matter what scale you're doing to get kids connected to nature, restore nature for anyone. Thank you from me and the Nature Conservancy for doing what you can do with your sphere of influence. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a great afternoon and take care.
Bye-bye.